I'm ready. I'm ready. So, okay, guys, we are kicking off the Research for Impact Month with you today. And what we're looking for is an open discussion all about culture and the culture of research within your organization. So this is an open dialogue. So we want your participation. We hope that you'll come with your questions and your stories. And we know that there's a lot of people here who have a lot of great insight that they can offer. Just so that you know, a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording this event, and if you need closed captioning, just click the link up in the left-hand corner. So before we get started, I really want to give a huge thank you to the ASAE Research Foundation and the Planning Committee. We've all spent a lot of time putting this and every event during the month of April for Research for Impact Month together. We ask that you join us for all of the events and speak up, share your insight. We learn better together. And, you know, we'll put links in the chats as we go along so you can register for those other events. If you haven't done so, I really suggest that you check out the ASAE Foundation website, especially the Impact Everyday section. It really showcases some amazing case studies on how organizations are using research as they support their audiences. So if you don't know, I'm Nicola Rougeau with Mighty Citizen, and we are a marketing, branding, and website agency that really believes that research kills opinions. I'm also a proud member of ASAE's Communication Professionals Advisory Council and the Key Consultants Committee. Overall, I've been working with associations for over 25 years, and I just love you people, and I love your complex organizations. So clearly, I might need my head examined a little bit. But I can't imagine that the gentleman also on camera needs an introduction, but I'm going to let Reggie go ahead and introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Reggie Henry, ASAE's Chief Information and Engagement Officer, and we were having a little bit of a conversation earlier about missing people. And I will tell you that this is a substitute, but a poor substitute, but a substitute nonetheless for us to get together and have some conversations I wish we were having in person. But we'll get there soon, so we'll take this for now.
It's all we can get, right? So I also want to just mention that we have some key ASAE folks in the chat and in the background that are making this happen. So thank you, Maisha and Andrea and Jenny with the foundation and everyone else that's been involved with this. So let's kick this off and really get started and talk about the culture of research. In order to interact with us, just raise your hand or put a question in the Q&A and we'll call you up. And we just ask that you keep your comments brief so that we can have as many people talk. Now, this seems like it's a pretty intimate group, so there should be many opportunities for everybody to speak. But since he's here, I have to say, Reggie, I get to spend an hour with you talking about data and culture.
Right.
Like, that's huge, like two favorite topics. So
Absolutely.
I'm gonna put you on the spot. And I'm really curious about, does ASAE have a data-driven culture, and has it always been that way?
So I'll tell you that I think we do. I think it's a pursuit. I don't know that you ever get there because data changes, and what data we need changes all the time. But before today, I went back and looked at the first time that we really adopted it as a formal thing that we would do at ASAE. And some of you might remember that we did this project called 7 Measures of Success, and a book was published about it. Now, I just put the link in the chat for people who want to go back and look at it. I'll tell you, some of the stuff in there is evergreen, especially the information around the importance of data and decision-making in organizations. You know, I'm going to read one passage. It says, and it was talking about the differences you see in organizations that are staff-driven versus organizations that are member-driven. And for the member-driven, it says what matters is being obsessively data-driven combined with the creativity and discipline to act on that data. And I think the act on that data is the real thing. We all have had data for any number of years, and Nicole, you mentioned about killing opinion. You know, data trumps opinion and gut feeling most of the time. Having said that, you do have to add some judgment in there, and that's where the creativity piece comes in. Second thing I'll say is that we've got new data. You know, I think you know, I almost wish we had started to define what we mean when we say data, because in most people's mind, they're thinking about transactional data. You know, the data that gets captured when somebody buys something or joins something. But if you think about all the conversations going on in social platforms, if you think about all the time somebody searches your website and either finds or doesn't find something, if you think about all those kinds of things, there's this unstructured data, which I think has the potential to be more powerful than any transactional data we have. So I'll say that. So, you know, it hasn't always been that way at ASAE. And I realize it probably hasn't been that way in most organizations because we didn't give people the right tools to look at data. You know, we always, and I remember these conversations because I was probably part of these conversations and maybe even started some of these conversations that are no longer relevant. We used to try to push everything into the AMS system purportedly to be able to get at the data. Well, through no fault of their own, they really didn't give us the ability to extract insight out of the data. And that's what we're talking about, you know, getting that data to a place that it not only tells us what people did, the transactional data, but what are they doing? Maybe that's more of the in the moment data, this unstructured data, and then more importantly, insight. What can we learn that helps us do what we need to do in the future? It helps our members be better and stronger in the future. So,
well, and I think the audience has changed too. Like it's not just member now. There's a lot of organizations who are now saying, okay, look, people don't want to be members. We have members and they're our key constituents, but we also have all these users, and how do we serve them? And so as audiences change, as technology changes, needs change, you know, we're all, it's a moving target. Like you said, it's constantly. So creating that culture of data and that culture of research to really facilitate those ongoing changes and being able to be nimble. I think 2020 really showcased an ability that associations were actually more nimble than we ever thought they were. But how do we facilitate that moving forward and creating that culture?
Well, I'm glad the title is what it is, because we were nimble in practice. I don't know that we were nimble in culture.
Okay.
So as we start to think about what lessons we've learned over the last year, you know, I know we're quick to get back to, I won't call it normal, but we're quick to get back to familiarity.
So what we knew.
To get back to what we think we know how to do well.
Yeah.
But we've all learned some lessons in the last year, and we can't forget those lessons. We can't forget that for a lot of associations, we reached far more people, members and non-members, than we ever have before.
And I think what data has shown is that what that normal was may not be what we need today.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. I think we've learned that lesson. I think we've learned a lesson that we've got to start making a distinction between, you know, the run-of-the-mill kinds of products and services we provide and whether or not we can provide them remotely or virtually. We've certainly proven that we can, but we've also proven that there's this human need that doesn't get taken care of virtually, and the data shows us that as well. When people are complaining about not being able to network well and all of those sorts of things. So a lot of lessons I think we've learned. Somebody just put in chat, dodging bullets really improves your nimbleness, or your nimbility, I guess is what they called it, which is so true. But you know, there's some data that we've gathered over the last year that we ought to be looking at with a fresh set of eyes, especially as we look to the future. So I think that's important.
I think so too. I think so too. So ASAE team, do we have any questions or people raising hands?
Well, I see somebody that I'm going to call on because she made a comment, and she's also one of the smartest people I know. Dina, will you join us up here for a bit?
And I'd like to give a shout out to Dina. She not only was also on this planning committee, she's also one of my cohorts on the Communication Professionals Advisory Council. So Dina is a very, very smart person.
So Dina, I'm going to ask you a question, because you and I probably had conversations about this way back from when we were thinking about websites and data and culture. What have you learned from a data and or cultural perspective, but hopefully it's some combination of those, in the last year that you think we should not forget?
That's a good question.
And Dina, you can now unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you'd like.
Is that better?
You both have an echo.
So try again, Dina.
I think it might be an
There
issue
you go.
because I'm dialing in. I'm not on the computer audio. Is that better?
Oh, we're good now.
Yeah,
we're
that's
good.
way better. You're good.
Okay. It is a good question, and I'll address the cultural piece. I think what I'm seeing from the content strategy angle about the data is that, and the reason I made the comment was, I hope people don't revert, particularly with events and education delivery, to what was, because I think the barriers to collaborating and participating have been broken down, and more people are able to participate now. So I hope we don't revert to face-to-face only and virtual only. I hope we continue to evolve into this new version of hybrid. And I think the data will support that. I know that Nicole, one of our communications council team members, Matt, has done a survey that he's presenting at MM&C on people's response. And one of the takeaways from that survey was that people liked the virtual and hybrid format idea more. So how do we exploit that as associations and really deliver more of the services and content to the people who need it?
It is so much more.
And what things have to change internally to enable that in program design and content delivery?
So I'm going to jump in a little bit here and say, you know, one of the things that I see us doing in all of our sessions is moving them to the COVID conversation. I realize I asked you the question, Dina, but I don't want us to get too far down that stream. But I've got another question that I'd love to ask, because I think that one of the questions we wanted to explore, Nicole, was what are the barriers that some people are facing in their own organizations from becoming more data-driven? So I'm going to ask people right there in the chat, 2 words, 3 words or less, what are the barriers that you're facing in your organization from becoming more data-driven? And I'm going to ask my good colleague, Glenn Tecker, to join us up here, if he will, because I think some of this has to do with and starts with the board's culture and how the board sees data and how it makes itself down through the organization. So Glenn, if you will, sir, give us your best about that, the board's involvement or lack of involvement in organizations being data-driven.
If the board does not have that commitment, then it's highly unlikely that it will occur within the organization. We find that the board is prepared to make that commitment when the CEO is able to make a reasonable argument and explanation of why it is in the best interest of the members to make that commitment. The barrier that we are often seeing, Reggie, is there is data overload and little expertise in real analytics, so that we have piles of information sitting in various places. And even when they are, when the bottle is opened and folks pour out the content, there's not a lot of folks yet who are able to make sense out of it. Some of that we think has to do with the staff who are involved in analytics not being staff who have association background. So while they understand the science of analytics, they may not necessarily understand the context enough to make sense out of it. So how does that tie to the board? Well, a good CEO will make the board aware of that dynamic and put into place activities that are required in order to bring up to speed people who are from staff from environments other than the not-for-profit voluntary participation context to what the unique dynamics of that are. That way, they are much better positioned to be able to provide full insight to the organization based upon not just the data, but also the information and experience that's available. Other than that, we haven't thought about this at all.
Thank you.
Glenn, I got a question here. How do you handle, because oftentimes there are boards or even leadership in the association itself where it's just not a belief that research is the right way to go. How do you combat that from a different level? Like to say, because it is a mindset and it is a culture. But if you think, I understand my audience, I know it, I don't need to do the research.
Nicole, you're going to laugh at the answer, but what we do,
I have no doubt, Glenn,
is we call it something else. What we do is we try to frame it in terms of, wouldn't you like to know what your members would like? And we never call it research.
Okay, but what if they say, I already know what they like?
There are ways of demonstrating whether or not that is true.
That is true.
What we often discover is that there is a difference on that particular issue within the board itself. Yeah. And when other board members raise the issue about, well, I'm not sure about that, let me tell you a story, that tends to create sufficient willingness to test that hypothesis. Well, we know what the members want. Reggie has heard me say this a million times. Probably the worst source of insight into a general member's view of the world is a board of directors member.
I completely agree. Thank you for letting me facilitate that question with you.
My pleasure.
And thanks for letting us put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on what Glenn said. The foundation did some research called the decision to join not too long ago.
Yeah.
And also the decision to volunteer not too long ago. And one of the findings out of that was this gap between what people who serve in leadership positions in an organization look like, feel like, decision-making process, how that differs from the general membership. And you're right, that plays itself out over and over again in organizations.
Well, Reggie, you just hit an interesting paradox. What it is that makes the view of the board different than the view of the membership is often data.
Absolutely.
They spend time in an information stream that is broader, deeper, and more frequently replenished than the information stream that the vast majority of members have an opportunity to spend their time in.
Absolutely.
So in some cases, it's actually the culture of data that is giving the board a view that is very different than the view of the general membership that doesn't have access to it.
Couldn't agree more. And one word you brought up in the course of explaining this, Glenn, was insight. And I think that if we took that approach to looking at this data, so that what gets back out of all of this data funnel that we produce is insight, I've seen our board at ASAE be very receptive to it. So I think nobody wants to look at reams of meaningful data, and sometimes you might be looking at reams of meaningful data and you realize that it's meaningless. Then don't use that. You use the stuff that tells a different story, gives a different type of insight. Glenn, thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Glenn.
My pleasure, folks, anytime.
Thanks, Glenn. It looks like we have a few questions that have popped in our Q&A.
Yep.
Want to go ahead and read those out loud to you all? Is that okay?
Yep.
So the first one that we have is from Bob London. And he says, Reggie, how do you handle as you were becoming and growing as a data-driven organization when other departments or board members wanted, or wouldn't it be nice to know data that was not part of driving ASAE forward?
Yeah, so Bob, that's a great question, Bob. And I will tell you, for people who are starting this journey, you got a decision to make, especially if you're building a data analytics practice from the ground up. And that decision to make is, do I attack this one project at a time, or do I take a step back and take all of our data and build a data warehouse? Okay. and just build the whole thing. And I'll tell you, we opted to do the second thing, which quite honestly frustrated me because I'm an impatient man about this stuff most of the time. But what I feared worse than not getting it done was getting a piece of it done, and then our team starts to ask the next question, and I can't answer the next question. Mm-hmm. That I get stuck in, well, you got to wait till I do the next data analytics project before I can get there. Having chosen the second option of building a more complete data warehouse, when those questions started to come in, it was really the process, let's develop a visualization to answer that question as opposed to having to rebuild something. So I think that's what worked here for us, is having the next answer available when somebody asks the next question. Mm-hmm. But also we realized we can't answer that question with some of the data that we can't answer that question because we don't have the data to answer that question, which started to put us on this cycle of realizing, okay, there's additional data that we need to be strategic. And so I think that was the cycle we were on, Bob, and I hope that answered your question.
I'm going to add to that because, you know, not every organization can do that deep dive and can say, yeah, let's create that data warehouse and make all of that happen. Sometimes it does have to become more incremental. And, you know, even in my own world, everything has to relate to what is our plan. So does this research apply to our strategic plan? Does it ladder up? If it's a research initiative that has to do with communications, does it ladder up to our communications plan that ladders up to the strategic plan? If it doesn't, it's a great initiative to have, but unless it's going to help what your strategic goals are, it's not going to be a priority. And that's even how Mighty Citizen operates.
So I'm going to add on to that. So what Nicole kind of illustrated is that you might have different needs of your data. Okay, some of that data might be need to guide you toward future strategic things that you need to do or questions that you need to ask. Some of it might be used to make more tactically to make a program better or to make a product sell better. So I think you need to decide up front, what do you want your data to do? Mm-hmm. But all of this conversation means that your culture has to be open to talking about data as if it's not a dirty word.
Not only that, but it also cannot sit in a silo. You can't have a meetings department doing one set of research and a marketing department doing another set of research and your membership team doing another set of research and tech team doing another set of research, and all your audience is getting overwhelmed. They're not talking to each other. You may actually have the data you need, but it's located in a different division. Yeah. You know, it's about getting, and that's a culture fit too, is to get rid of the silos and think in a holistic manner.
So I'm looking at a couple of the things that are making their way in as barriers, and one of them was the lack of or missing quality data. One thing I will say is that one stumbling block that I see a lot of associations face is they give up because they say our data isn't clean. Mm-hmm. Well, newsflash, the data that you have is the data that you have. So you
got to start somewhere.
Start somewhere, and quite honestly, when we first started ours, that made the organization have a bigger appetite for cleaning the data. Mm-hmm. Because they realized that as we were starting to use this data, that it needed to be at a different level. Nicole, I'm going to back up to something you were talking about with independent departments doing data gathering, which I think is fine. It has to be coordinated. Mm-hmm. It absolutely has to be coordinated, and it has to be aggregated or centralized some way so that the organization can make use of it if you're trying to do something strategic. If you're trying to do something tactical, it might very well sit in that department to take care of that department's needs. But I have not seen any case where data going on or being involved in an events thing that it can't roll up to be strategic to another conversation in the organization. So mm-hmm. I think you're right that this stuff needs to be combined in some kind of way.
It's valuable somewhere, right?
Yeah. Were there other questions, guys?
Yes, so we have another question from Glenn Tecker. Virtual makes anyone a competitor, but it's mainly associations who offer face-to-face engagement. What can distinguish what associations offer from what commercial vendors and even the larger members of some associations offer? What role can data and analytics play in creating a distinguishing culture for voluntary membership organizations?
Wow. See, Glenn always does this. What he does is he asks a question that makes me believe we need to have a separate program to talk about it. but I'm going to give it my best shot, because I think we've seen some of that here at ASA in particular. And I'm going to answer it two different ways. One of the things that drives me to distraction is when we say we don't know something about a member's needs or a group of members' needs. When we admit we don't know, we start guessing rather than asking. So one of the data collection things we use now is a company called PropFuel. And I know you guys have heard me talk about them before, but it's the place where I'll describe it is that we have an ongoing conversation with our members. And that includes when I have a question that I want answered, rather than guessing, I ask a whole bunch of our members that question so we get that answer and can feed that in alongside all the rest of our data to help our decision making. Glenn, I think what has happened since we started to use that is, you know, I look at some of the things we do, some of the educations we offer, and when we actually talk to our members and ask our members, they give us the association context when we ask those questions, and they give us the association context when they give us the answers to those questions, and then we have the ability to feed that back in terms of how we market a particular thing, because our members are using the association vernacular and language when they talk about it, and how we do program development, because the members are giving us the vernacular and context in which they talk about those things. So, you know, context as data is an important thing for us. Language as data in terms of how we do things is an important thing for us. But I think we have to ask them, and I don't have anything beyond that for now, but thank you for calling out the virtual things that we need to pay attention to from a data perspective.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And we have another question that's come in from Tom Mcclintock. Speaking of ongoing conversations, like Reggie mentioned with PropFuel, when do you look at the viability of a particular data question as worth a one-off research effort versus an ongoing question that would benefit from integrating your AMS with another system to get not a snapshot answer, but a stream of information? I often find that we make too many decisions as if we're tied to our current technology infrastructure, whereas a single API could make your existing system more versatile.
Oh my God, Thomas, where are you going with that? That's like 5 questions that deserve 5 answers, but Nicole, go ahead and tackle that.
Oh, you want me to tackle that? Okay. I don't know. Let's see, which one? Let's break it down. I think, well, again, I'm going to circle it back to culture, right? What I like about PropFuel is that it creates a culture of research. And it creates a one-off conversation. I also feel like PropFuel is a great example of what could be created in a personal environment. Like, for example, Reggie, I know you talk to a lot of members, but as you were in that conversation and you were talking about, oh, how was your golf on Saturday? You're able to ask the same question and collect data in a personal manner. So there's many, many different ways to do that. Integrating it with the association management system would be beneficial for sure, because you can report on it. But then again, it's a data resource and data hub that's becomes very overly complicated. So it's hard. And I feel like dashboards create a lot of benefit behind that, but there's, again, so much data. So how do you decide what's important and what's to capture and what's to view?
And Thomas, what I will say to you is this, and meaning no harm to my colleagues who develop and sell association management systems, because they are an integral part of our community and a very important part of our community. But what I will offer is that the type of analytics that we need today doesn't get done in an AMS system. So I'm one to think that maybe we don't need to get everything back into the AMS system. Maybe we need to get it into a place that can do analytics in a different kind of way. So Maisha, if I can, I didn't anticipate doing this, but I'm going to share my screen. Can I do that, Maisha?
I think you can.
Does he have the power?
I mean, do I have the permission to do that is what I was asking. All right.
Just remember you're on video.
I will. So here's an example to answer some of the things that were brought up. This data that you see here is an example of unstructured data. This data is coming out of our private social network Collaborate, for example. So, you know, one of the things in your conversation, Thomas, was how do you connect things in a way that you start to get this data? Okay, so what I have here is if I want to know right now what's on C-levels folks' mind, I can click on C-levels folks' mind and it'll tell me that this is one of the more important things they're talking about right now. If I want to know what's on small staff associations' mind, I can click there and see what's on small staff associations' mind. This data right here, which represents real-time conversations happening in Collaborate, gives me the ability to not look back in a way that transactions does, but at least look now and help me look forward. So that data right there, I'm showing it to you now as a standalone thing, but this type of data is also feeding into our data warehouse, so I can combine that with all the other data we have, and believe you me, it gives us a different level of insight than we would have had without that.
So how does a small staff handle that, or how does an organization who doesn't have the analytics platform or the you know, the only real tool and subset that they have is their community and their of course they have Google Analytics and they have their association management system.
So it'll be a little harder to do, but every small staff I know has a spreadsheet.
Yeah, at least one.
Yeah, and my proof of concept for this, excuse me, years ago when I did it, was I took some data, put it in the spreadsheet, did some charts and graphs, and figured out what's the insight that's to be had here.
Yeah.
And that started to get our organization thinking a little differently. And I remember the exact problem we were looking at, because we had some myth busting we needed to do, that depending on where the annual meeting was, we got different populations of people. Well, I went back and got the last 5 annual meetings and in fact, plotted it on a geographic map, and it said, nope, people come to the annual meeting from Chicago, excuse me, Washington, D.C. area, a few other places, and that doesn't change much no matter where the meeting is. And so having some data that starts to bust the myths or change thinking helps a lot.
Kills the opinion.
Yeah.
Favorite statement. Okay. Maisha had mentioned that she wants to call up Thomas.
Bring him up. Hey, Thomas.
How you doing?
Make sure that you unmute yourself.
Oh, all right. Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. I was double muted. But anyway, it's been a while since I've spoken to you, Reggie and Maisha. It's good to see you again. Nicole, I like your comments. I reached out to you on LinkedIn. So thanks
fabulous.
for letting me on board here. Reggie, my question was, where are you going with, we shouldn't put the data in the AMSs anymore. We need better analytics programs to analyze it outside. Are you talking about data visualization like Power BI, or what are you getting at with that?
Absolutely. Something like Power BI, or if you don't use Power BI, there's other data visualization tools that give you a much broader set of options in explaining the data. You know, our AMS systems are great at storing the data, but one of the reasons why we used to store data there was so that we could aggregate it and analyze it. So, you know,
but you can still store it. Like if you're using Power BI, you can have all of that data in your AMS, and then you can pull that out in terms of a dashboard, just like you're talking about with Collaborate, only not just Collaborate traffic. You could get your PropFuel data, you could get your Collaborate, anything else in there, but still the AMS is the hub. That's where it all gets stored. And I don't see why that needs to change. I mean, you integrate your AMS with you know, Great Plains or your accounting software. So why not integrate it with Power BI?
So again, like I said, you've opened up another session we could have. But the bottom line is, why am I going to push all of my data into one place only to push it to another place to do the analysis I need to do? I let my AMS do what it was designed to do, okay? And I let my accounting system do what it was designed to do. And I let my event system do what it was designed to do well. And then I let my analytics platform do what it was designed to do well.
But you need to have a central data warehouse for it all, because you don't know what data you're going to need. You don't know whether the event information or the accounting information or both sets of information are what you're going to need. So I think it makes sense to still use that AMS centric model, just like you use a website centric model for your online presence.
Well, we'll agree to disagree until we do that that talks about that. How about that?
Okay. All right. That sounds great.
You still have to do what's best for your organization. And sometimes that's different from what the other people are doing. But the fact that we can all, you know, understand it and get different ideas to see where we can find our next innovation is key.
Yeah, what
Agreed.
I would say, though, is that we have to be willing to break our own norms.
Yeah.
Thinking about this in everything that we do. And we've got some established things that we've always done that sometimes get in the way of us being innovative and solving problems. Not saying that this is a particular one, although I might believe that it is, but I think we have to really open our minds and start to change the culture of our organizations to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Thomas, for your question. All right, we have like 3 more questions here, Reggie. So Kimberly, there are some vendors or business partners who are hesitant or outright refuse to participate in a virtual environment. How do we use data to illustrate that a significant portion of members who prefer virtual engagement?
So Kimberly, are you talking about from an exhibiting point of view? Give me a little bit more, Kimberly.
Can we call Kimberly up?
Yeah.
We sure can. Let's just take 1 second and get Kimberly on.
We've got the power.
And Kimberly,
Told you I was gonna sing, Reggie.
Kimberly, how you doing?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully you can't see me. Well, I think it covers many things, and it certainly depends on the vendor or the business partner. But I would say exhibiting is at the top of the list where there is a great deal of hesitancy. And I think probably if you surveyed a bunch of people, it's because these companies have invested a great deal of capital and other resources into the platform that they're familiar with. And while the associations as a whole have been nimble and have adjusted out of necessity, I don't think that the business partner community within associations have adjusted as quickly.
So I will tell you that one of the things that we've learned, and we've probably done 5 or 6 virtual major events now, Kimberly, that 2 things. One, we didn't take a step back and rethink from the ground up, what is that relationship that needs to be there for an industry partner to get value in this virtual environment? We just assumed virtual exhibit halls. And what some people have called exhibit halls when I've gone to their meetings, it's a square panel on a web page where you can click and drop your business card, or you can click and set up an appointment, and that's not engagement. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things we have to do is start to have conversations with our industry partners about their value proposition and how they would think to get it from a virtual environment, as opposed to thinking that a virtual exhibit hall is necessarily the right way to do it. Now, what our data has shown us is that in situations where for example, we started doing this thing called demo days, Kimberly, and demo days was a way to get our technology business partners exposure to the association community, okay? We did our first demo days, I forgot when it was, but we had 900 people registered to be online watching product demonstrations. Never would have thought that would have happened, first of all, but we were able to confirm that 800 of those people watched most of the demos. When I took that data out the next time to sell demo days, no problem, no problem, because the data proved it, but it also was a different way of connecting people.
I would agree 100%, and I do think you're right. I think the conversations were being had in silos and not together, so there wasn't sort of a collaborative conversation between the associations and their business partners. We were just basically asking them to fit within a mold that was already created, and it wasn't collaborative. So I would agree that that is a big part of the issue, but I do think, as you said, Reggie, there has to be a larger conversation about how do we move forward in this space, because certainly ASE and many other associations realized an uptick in participation.
Absolutely.
In the virtual area. And so what that revealed was that there was, whether it was for a monetary reason or for convenience, there was a segment that had never participated in person and probably never would, but how do you still keep those folks engaged, and how do they become a potential partner with some of the industry partners? So I do think data does play a large role in that.
I'm going to turn this right back around to data and culture. And
Yep.
both of you nailed it on the head. Like I am a consultant and an industry partner. And, we did not see a fabulous return from just the booth. Where we saw it was when we could engage and we could actually showcase our expertise, which we are. We're experts in what we do, and we bring great insights. There's a lot of industry partners and consultants that do just that. Demo days is just a great way that showcases some of those. There's other ways to do that. ASAE's annual meeting was fabulous for us. It resulted in the quickest contract I've ever had in my years of exhibiting at ASAE, but it wasn't because of the exhibit hall. It had everything to do with the conversations that were had in chats during sessions and where education was being shared. And so we have to look at that data, and that makes me question not only the data of virtual meetings, but the data of in-person meetings, how best to serve all of those different marketplaces. And do business services need different needs than hospitality? How do we, and so there's many different ways to cut and and slice and dice and make future decisions on this. But we all learn through experience. And what I loved is that ASAE took the survey results, they listened to the exhibitors. We're having more conversations now than we've ever had. And I feel like that's just a starting point. But it's, again, knowing your audience, knowing what their needs are, and meeting them where they are and figuring out where you can both grow together.
Yeah, and Kimberly, I'm going to add something, and then I'm going to respond to something that Glenn had in the chat area as well. But I hope what we also do is not only look at that industry partner data, but look at the profile of the meeting attendees for these virtual events that we've had. Because quite honestly, our annual meeting profile has had, if I compare it to the 3 years before and this virtual event, had a much larger percentage of coordinators and managers and directors, when typically it had been a senior staff kind of focused kind of thing. So we went from having, and excuse my language and smack me if you want to, but a lot more of the have-nots were at our annual meeting. And we don't want to lose those people because they have educational needs too. But if we were going to react to that data, that certainly does change the footprint, the knowledge print, and the wisdom print of our annual meeting, or almost any other meeting we would do. And Glenn, I hear you. I think, Glenn's question is some exhibitors have data that suggests that folks who attend virtual rather than face-to-face do not have purchase authority. What I will tell you is that when we tried something different like demo days, and surveyed that group, most of the people who came to something like that did have purchase authority. So I think it really is a matter of rethinking what is the experience that are going to bring buyers and sellers together that's not a virtual exhibit hall, and we'll probably get it something better.
And I also like not to discredit the managers and the coordinators. They're the future leaders, especially because ASAE has all the education they need to move them forward to get into that CEO position. So with that, and as I know, relationships take time in this industry. People buy from who they know. So there's a lot of value in that. All right, I'm gonna, we have a question here. Is it from C?
Yes.
Saying that correctly? Okay. What was the software or tool that Reggie used to create the qual data from Collaborate?
Oh, so that data was being visualized in Power BI, and kudos to Thomas for bringing up the API thing. The reason that's there at all is me trying to get our staff to visualize what does listening data look like. I'm a big proponent that all of our systems have to listen. And if we listen to them, all of our systems have a story to tell about our members. And I kept saying that, and one of our staff members said, "What the hell are you talking about? Prove it." And so one weekend I called up Higher Logic and said, "Just shoot me all the data from a said group of conversations," and built some things to demonstrate it. But that was Power BI using data that's being fed from Collaborate.
Okay. All right. And Glenn has a lot of questions today, which I'm thankful for. We find that often the nature of the decision is to be made, or the question to be answered will help direct the researcher to a one-off or a continuing measure. If a continuing measure is desired, then you can find the right place to locate it.
The answer to that question is yes. He's right.
So that's not really a question. There we go. Do we have any other questions or comments? Guys, we have like 7-8 minutes left before we have to wrap this up. Anybody else who would like to tell a story about culture or share some of their experience and challenges, how they overcame something in creating culture?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say, Nicole, as we wait for things to come in, is unfortunately, once data gets past the transactional stage in organizations, that data has been, and the data analytics has been the purview of the senior staff in organizations. So one cultural thing that you can do is to kind of have a data democratization in your organization where everybody gets to see the analytics, everybody gets taught to understand those analytics, and everybody gets taught to use it in their work. So that it doesn't feel like all the time, well, the senior team needs to see this because they're the decision makers. All of us know that the bottom line is the senior team is the furthest away from the actual work that has to be done to serve members. And so the data about the results of serving those members needs to be down at the place where the work actually happens. So some kind of data democratization thing would be great.
And I think the best thing you can do is teach your staff how to use it. Like having that one silo, the guy or girl who keeps all the data, knows how to use it, how to run all the reports. It's great to disperse that information and be able to have that across the board.
Absolutely.
So Jennifer Nelson mentioned how can and should we shift thinking about data and shifting organizational culture so we're not just reacting to data, but using it to anticipate future needs and opportunities. Yes, 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 and yes.
Yeah, I think so. Just from my perspective, it's not a shift from to, it's an addition to. You know, we still need data about operations and things like that to help us be more efficient in those categories. But we absolutely need to have data that starts to tell us more about future needs. You know, one of the things that I'm glad to see happening now is that we've got some organizations in our space, in the association space, thinking about predictability, and they're thinking about it from an association point of view. I think it's not you know, we're not Microsoft, we're not Amazon, you know, we're associations. And we luckily have some people starting to do work in that area. I know Association Analytics has a recommendation engine as part of their product that they're doing. I'm sure Gravitate has some things like that, and all the other organizations that were doing it. Didn't mean to single anybody out, but we absolutely need to get there, Jenny. Thank you.
Excellent. So we do have an attendee with their hand raised,
Yep.
Polly Karpowicz. So we are going to go ahead and give you access to speak, Polly.
Hey, Polly.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm so excited about this conversation. This is great. Reggie, something you said earlier and Jenny's question, I think all the questions throughout this almost hour we've been together kind of links to communications. I'm with Westat. We offer research support to associations, and we're not in the software business at all. So we're basically selling our brains. And what delights us is when we're able to help an association connect the dots across their organization in terms of, you know, this department or that program needs some insight, or even encouraging them to have those kinds of conversations. So I just wanted to encourage everyone here, if you haven't had those kinds of conversations across your association, find a way to do it. Some associations have formal committees. They have like a data committee. We like to kind of back up a little bit and not talk only in terms of data, but insight, because we all know here that we're not simply talking about quantitative data and transactional data. We're talking about insight wherever it may come from, and from whomever it comes from across your stakeholder group. So thinking within your organization about what insight you need to drive your association forward. And that can be really effectively done in sort of informal ways within an association, or even more formal ways in terms of creating a staff committee. Really, speaking to Reggie's point about the front lines, involve them. So many, when I worked within an association, we had a very open culture where if someone had an idea, we had open doors for that. But if you're a little more hierarchical, there may be ways to find out across the organization what's needed, and across your committees too. There can also be silos between the staff side and the committees, in the sense of, you may have 3 committees and they're all sort of looking for similar insight. But if the staff aren't talking, and if the committees aren't aware, it's really on the staff side to kind of make those linkages. But I think that's really where we can drive forward. And dashboards are fantastic tools and great insight. And I encourage associations to use them, as well as looking at original research or other places where your insight already lives. So I think we have terrific tools, and the vendors out there have, since I've been in the association space for over 20 years, it's so amazing to see what tools we have within the AMS space. So let's use them, and let's figure out how we can supplement those tools with original research if there's a question they don't answer, in lots of different ways, not just surveys. We love surveys, of course, but that's not often sometimes the best way to get an answer. So anyway, I'll step down. Just so excited to be here. This is terrific. I'm looking forward to the rest of the month.
Well, Polly, I'm going to +1 Glenn's +1 of your comment, because I have long thought, and you guys have confirmed it in me, that us focusing, especially when we start to think about the board and its culture, changing this conversation from a conversation about data to a conversation about insight, will take us a long way. The other thing that I would add, and I'm going to ask my foundation colleagues before I start talking about this too out loud, is a third component of this data and culture is courage, because organizations have long seen data that requires them to change and lack the courage, et cetera, to change. So I think us wrapping all of that into a nice tidy ball would make for, you know, if we had some case studies, that we might do another program where we actually walked through an association that came out with some insights that looked decidedly different than their organization did, and had the courage to make the changes based on the data and work its way through. So we're supposed to stop at some point in time. My issue, what happens if I don't want to stop? What happens if we want to keep this conversation going?
Well, you might lose a few people.
Well, if you want to keep this conversation going, I suggest that you show up on Friday and you show up to the Collaborate post this coming week. And I suggest that you show up to next week's open discussions. Like, get on the ASAE Research Foundation's website, the Research for Impact Month. There's a ton of different activities on there, and keep the conversations going. We want all of the more we can communicate with each other, the more we can lift each other and help each other. So, and we see things differently. Like I love it when we can get into a discussion when we don't see things in the same light, because that makes us question and it makes us be more innovative. So I happen to love that.
I want to keep going right now.
I know. Well, you know what? You don't have much patience.
All right.
Well, we did have one more question that was in the chat, in the Q&A section of our program. And whether we feel like we want to sidebar with this attendee and be able to answer that question, or how we'd like to handle that. Sounds good. I heard you say, yep, Nicole.
Well, let's just bring it up, because I think we can handle it pretty quickly. And if not, we can always follow up with Kimberly. But we talked about the need to understand analytics. How do we begin that process? I often find that we have a lot of surveys, but we're not asking the right questions or looking at the data in the right way. Bing. Again, another session on surveys that we could put together.
But second that, before we move on, it is so important that you're thoughtful about what question do you need to ask to get the kind of data you need.
Yeah. What is the goal? What is the end goal? What are you trying to get to? And what do you need to know in order to get there?
I will press my colleagues to see if we can come up with some sessions that talk about that. Is how do you, because that might be a learned skill, is how do you go from goal to the beginning of data collection in a way that ensures that you're going to get the kind of data you need to do whatever you're trying to do. So we'll think about that and see if we can come up with a session for that.
Yep. Okay. Well, Reggie, it is time to wrap up. We have 1 minute left. You know, I mentioned that there's other events that we should attend this week to keep the conversation going. Just to remind you, this Friday from 2 to 3, there's a session called It's Time to Do Something with Your Data. We've all mentioned it on this call. We are sitting on mountains and mountains of data. How do we do anything with it? So we have a very energetic and passionate set of panelists that are lined up to share their journeys and answer your questions. So challenge them, be in the audience and chat and be as active as you were today. We also have, as I mentioned, some open-ended forum discussions that you're going to see and that you can sign up for. Also some Collaborate discussions. You know, we appreciate you. And I think the one thing that ASAE has really pushed forward, and the ASAE Research Foundation, is that we are certainly stronger together. I firmly believe that. And, you know, we just thank you so much for your participation. And we thank the ASAE Foundation and the Planning Committee for making this happen. Anything else to add, sir?
Thank you, Nicole, for moderating us through this. Thank you. You always do a wonderful job at that.
Well, thank you for being my co-host, my friend, my colleague, and someone I admire very, very much, Reggie. Okay. All right, guys, we will be seeing you around.
Take care, everyone. Hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, yes, yes.